emerging like strays. Climbing out the gutter, I am real like the fray. Wrapped in shadow, but they shine like noon. For hearts beating, sink, break the.
Welcome back to another episode of the King's Effect podcast. And I'm very excited to have my special guest here today, Spencer Washington. And we're going to be talking about Black leadership in terms of Black men's mental health. So introduce us a little bit about where you're from, what you do, and then we'll get in the conversation.
Yeah, so I'm a resident here in Texas, in the Houston area. I'm a clinical director for a fairly large state agency. We work with adolescent males who are incarcerated. I want to be clear, I'm not here to represent my employer. This is completely separate. I am a licensed psychological associate with independent practice. So I've got roughly 20 years or so in the business of mental health, working both with adolescents and also with men. And so on the adult side, I've got some experience with professional coaching, specifically with men in leadership positions. And so I wanted to talk about that today. I think sometimes we often overlook people who might be upper echelon, more successful, more experienced, but they also come with their own mental health needs. And I know being a Black male in those positions can be challenging for a number of reasons. So I wanted to go into that conversation a little bit today.
Well, I appreciate you for coming on the podcast here. You are helping a lot of Black men around the world, where we talk about a lot of different diverse topics and stuff like that related to Black men's mental health. So let's get into it. What has been your experience? What mental health challenges have you experienced being in a leadership role, or maybe some of your friends?
Right. So folks that I've talked to, and I can say myself to some degree, I think one of the biggest concerns can be what they call the imposter syndrome, right? This feeling, this thought, this process of either not being good enough or not belonging in that particular space, right? And this is not uncommon when you look at spaces that are not occupied by Black people, or especially Black men. So you may find yourself as one of the few, if not the only, Black male in a leadership position. And so it presents with some very unique challenges.
What specific challenges are you facing, that, without saying too much, but just,
Right.
to give us an idea?
So some of the things that come up, and for the men that I've spoken with, include how to reconcile your own cultural background, what you bring to the table, with the corporate or the executive environment in which they work. Not being seen as too aggressive, not being seen as too assertive, being mindful not to come across as intimidating, or actually working really hard not to meet a particular stereotype, right? Mm-hmm. And so, again, I've talked to several men who have been in key positions, executive positions, and it's a unique stress that many others may not have to carry or work through, and that can be difficult. And so one of the things that I advise people on doing, especially in situations like that, is to find a network or a community outside of work where you can have those conversations with other men in similar positions, where you can have that camaraderie, that support, talk to those experiences. There may not always be a single solution, but it helps tremendously to know you're not in that boat by yourself. And so I've seen so many men get relief simply from the fact of, I'm not the only one. I've got someone else that knows where I'm coming from, what I'm speaking to.
So how do we change that narrative that Black men can be in powerful positions without being aggressive or intimidating, or the angry Black man person?
So it's a very interesting question when you ask, and it's complicated for a number of reasons, but it's not specifically on us to change. Right? Those who hold the stereotype about us being that way is where the work needs to happen, right? And so the challenge becomes how to maintain yourself as a person, how to maintain your integrity at work, how not to cross the line into the stereotype, or even if you do, how to neutrally respond to anyone who approaches you with that stereotype without becoming, again, too assertive, too offensive. So it's a tightrope to walk. There's not a one size fits all solution. I tell folks to stay true to themselves, stay grounded. It's really, really important that when you are a Black male in those leadership positions, you have to be knowledgeable about your career. You have to be knowledgeable about your industry. You have to essentially be an expert, and you've got to really work on honing in on your management skills. It's one of those things, and it's unfortunate, but you've really got to prove your worth, right? You've really got to prove that you're capable and able, more so than others may have to. It's an unfortunate reality, but that is where a lot of us find ourselves in those spaces. So,
And that kind of brings me to my next question is I just wanted to get your input about it because I've been in a lot of, I haven't been in a lot of powerful executive roles and stuff like that. I'm more like the employee, but now starting to have my own businesses and stuff like that. So I understand you have to really be really intentional about your words so it doesn't come off as aggressive or mean.
right,
But at the end of the day, you have to take care of business too, just like a particular white counterpart would. You know what I
right,
mean? You still have to take care of your business and you have to have respect from your employees and you have to have tight deadlines and stuff like that in order to keep the business profitable. Because if there's no business coming in and people think they can do whatever they want, come in whatever hours they want, then that is ultimately as a leader going to affect a lot of other things in the corporate world and stuff like that. But my other question is, I know you said it's not up to us to change it, but what is some of the like? Because I know a lot. I know if you've been watching the news lately, not to get too political, but there's a lot of cutting back of the DEI
right,
initiatives and stuff like that.
right.
That's going to hurt people of color to get from the hiring process, maybe even moving up in the company, because a lot of HR is thinking, well, I don't have to promote people of color or I don't have to hire people of color and stuff like that. So will that play a little bit of role into affecting Black men's mental health as well too?
I think it absolutely could. You bring up interesting points, and I agree, not to get too political about it, but those types of decisions, while they are, for the most part, beyond our control. So in psychology, we have this term called locus of control. And it's essentially what it sounds like, but being mindful of those things you can control and understanding what you cannot and focusing your efforts on those things you can control, right? And so in circumstances like that, where they can be detrimental to your mental health, that's where outside of the workplace, you have to have a concerted plan, be very intentional about your mental health, right? Spending time with your family, making sure you have healthy connections with friends, neighbors, mentors. In some cases, depending upon how stressful that may be in the workplace, you may consider looking for another career opportunity, right? At a different employer where you wouldn't have those same types of barriers or issues in the workplace. So, but we've got to be very deliberate about that, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not something you can be passive about or wait until things just pass over. You've really got to be intentional about taking care of yourself. And so, are you getting enough sleep? Are you eating healthy? Are you making time for exercise? Are you making sure that you have a really good social support system, right? Do you have hobbies and things that you can decompress and enjoy doing outside of work, right? That provides that balance. So as much as we have that backdrop in that political landscape, we've got to focus on what we can control. And I think that brings some balance to that until we're able to find ourselves in a different position. Again, whether that be finding a different employer, looking for other opportunities, or in cases like starting your own business. I've seen people get motivated when they run into those barriers at work and they decide, hey, I might just be better on my own, right? Let me start my
Yeah,
own thing where I'm calling the shots, right? And I've seen
yeah.
that happen. And there's a gentleman that I consulted with, or consulted for, should I say, who actually did that. He was in the mental health arena. It wasn't a DEI issue, but he didn't really appreciate the direction things were going in. And he switched into another lane and has been very successful since. So it's more than possible.
Yeah, I do believe that it is possible to branch out and do your own thing. But going back to the corporate world in a way, what do you think is some of the stigmas around Black men's mental health in the workplace per se? Is there resources that they can actually help to with the DEI initiatives, or is there some of the meetings that maybe your managers and stuff like that can talk about? So we can continue to elevate Black men in powerful positions.
Again, interesting question, and a very timely question. I think in this particular time, this particular space, and this political environment, I don't think you're going to have those resources at work, not in those particular fashions where you can speak to a unique set of needs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most employers, through your benefits package, will offer or have what we call the EAP, Employee Assistance Program.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go through EAP, they can access, counseling services and things of that nature. So you could potentially use that and set up individual counseling that's covered by your benefits and talk to a therapist, a clinician, a psychologist about those concerns, but it would be outside of work. It would likely be on a one-on-one situation. So it wouldn't be program or support that's offered in the workplace, right? It's a benefit through your workplace, but not in the workplace. But when you talk about some of those barriers, and this was even before DEI, Black men in executive positions, they don't just walk the tightrope of stereotypes, but you face those stereotypes from both your Black and your white counterparts.
Talk about that. Yeah.
And so, right. So this is interesting where you finally reach that level, right? It's been a career-long goal. You get there. And again, you may be one of the few occupying that space. And so you've got the pressure of the cultural fit, feeling like the outsider because you're one of the only Black men. And then you've got some of the Black folks that will look at you as the sellout, right? Or the person who bought into the other, so to speak, right?
Or they think you're better than them.
That part, right? And so when I tell you that there's a lot of undisclosed or unannounced mental health pressures, you're walking that tight line, right? Of trying to be true to yourself and your background, as well as acclimate to the new cultural background that you walked into. And it can be a back and forth. There's not a one size fits all. And I think part of that challenge is why it's very, very important for people in those roles to seek out that support. Oftentimes, you're going to find that outside of the workplace. And in our current climate, with programs being canceled and pulled back, just as you said, you're going to have to find it outside of the workplace. And so it's going to be very key for men in executive positions to find those support groups, connect with those people, find a mentor that you can talk about it and walk that through. Even in my professional coaching days, it's one of those things where the old phrase is misery loves company, right?
Mm-hmm.
But on the flip side of that, part of the reason why counseling itself is so helpful and psychological services are so helpful is because when people come in and they're able to disclose their problems and their feelings and their thoughts, and they come into someone who understands and doesn't judge them based upon that, there's a level of empathy and openness and relief from that particular client or that person talking to the counselor. That same dynamic works when you find the right support group. So again, I want to emphasize that it's not necessarily the solution that's in that support group. It's the idea of you're not the only one carrying this burden, right?
Yeah.
I can relate.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I know where you're coming from, brother. I hear you, right? And when you get that, you're like, I'm not the only one, right? It's still hard, but I'm not in this fight by myself. And so that can be a tremendous relief. And that's why that support system is so important.
All right. My next question is, I wanted to bring it down to, I know you said it's not probably a lot of resources that's going to help Black men that's in powerful positions or executive positions, but surely you can work with HR to maybe start thinking about some solutions. I know they're cutting back the DEI and all of that, but do you think maybe in the future, when maybe if they reverse the DEI initiatives, do you think that maybe then you could start talking to HR and say, maybe we need to have more people of color? Because if somebody's been in a job for 13 years, why aren't they elevating? Why aren't they moving up in the company? And their counterparts maybe are moving up, but they're still at the same level. And I know that doesn't necessarily have to do anything with the Black Queer Initiative, it's more personal growth. But so understanding that when you have white people or other people that's advancing and the Black people are not advancing, how does that really look?
So I want to qualify my response by saying two things. First and foremost, I'm not a human resource professional, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as much as I appreciate your question, I can answer this on the outskirts of the question itself. I would imagine that if that particular situation speaks to a specific policy or procedural violation, they could go to HR, right? If it would appear to be an issue of discrimination, they might be able to go to HR. But again, understanding that in our current environment, those issues are being rolled back, right? Those protections,
Mhm.
those initiatives are being rolled back. So I don't know. That might be location specific. It might be employer specific, where you're able to take that conversation to HR. It's not something that can be done everywhere. And quite honestly, it would not be my particular recommendation for the solution, right?
Okay.
I get that, but a person going through that route, you're going to be walking on thin ice, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's touchy for a number of reasons, which is why I'm trying to steer clear. Answering your question to
Mhm.
the best that I can, but I think the solution is going to be, again, evaluating your career where you are, looking at, especially if you've been in a position 12, 13 years, you feel like you've earned the opportunity for a promotion, for additional responsibilities, and that opportunity hasn't been presented. It's time to reevaluate if that's the place where you need to be, right?
Mhm.
It's time to reevaluate what other opportunities out there might help you reach that career goal. Going back to my previous point, this is where it really comes to the forefront with that support group, because again, this is not just a band of brothers, so to speak, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
You're networking with other executives, right? When I talk about that support group, you're rubbing elbows with people in similar positions, and to some degree, you're developing those professional contacts. And so it's not uncommon for someone that you've been involved in a support group to say, hey, we just had an opening in our marketing department. If you're interested, I can drop a name for you. I can open the door. I can put you in contact with this person, right? And that's happened. Literally, that's happened. So having that support group, it comes with a number of benefits, right? It can
Mhm.
alleviate the mental health strain of feeling like you're the only one, but it can also put you in a position of meeting people that may have the opportunity to help you make that career jump, one that you didn't even anticipate, right? So, to your point, if I've been with an employer that long, and personally, I've been in a situation where I was with an employer for 7, 8 years. I was advocating for a promotion. It never came to fruition. I had to make the decision: is it time to move on, right?
Mhm.
And that's what I did when the opportunity presented itself. None of that was in relation to DEI or anything like that, but that would be my response, right? So I would not expect HR to resolve that. We live in a day and age, and quite honestly, man, we've been here for some time to where going back to a former president that said, hey, it's up to us. We are the ones we've been waiting for. That holds true even with your own career advancement, right? Don't put that in the hands of someone else.
You got
If
to
you've
make it
made those
happen.
efforts, if you've made those efforts, if you're bringing your A game every day, and you continue to be overlooked or not recognized, then you may want to evaluate if that's a place where you want to be, place where you want to remain, and what the options are. Because the likelihood is there's someone out there that's willing to take advantage of your skill set and pay you well for it. So
All right. Well, that kind of brings us up on time here, Spencer. But I do appreciate you. But before we go, I always ask my guests at the end of the show, what is some of inspirations or some of like the thoughts that you might have around people that's struggling in the world right now? You give them
oh,
advice to
man.
struggling
Uh,
because I know a lot of people are struggling right now. They're
yeah,
homelessness, trying to find a job.
yeah. And this is something I'm working on, man. I'm full disclosure. I'm 46, and so probably over the last 5 to 10 years, I've been trying to make a point of looking at purpose. What is my purpose, right? And trying to do my best. It's far from perfect, but trying to do my best to align my life with that purpose, right? And so wherever you are in life, sometimes things get really stressful, and it happens. You might go into survival mode, and literally you can't see the trees for the forest. You're trying to make day to day happen. But I would encourage people to take a step back, find a space where you can decompress and really give some sincere, honest thought to who am I? Number one, right? Who am I? And where do I want to be in life? And start making intentional steps and efforts to reach those goals, right? Sometimes the purpose may not be all about career. For me, it is, right? But even saying that, My family comes first and foremost. So every advancement in my career, I see it as a benefit to my family, as an example to my kids, as another step up in preparation for retirement. So my family is the front and center, and everything else stems from that, right? I absolutely want to be personally accomplished. I want to be successful in my career, my profession. But even then, that's a reflection of I've got kids watching me. Now, my youngest she's a young adult. She's in college, but they're still watching. And I don't think I'm done yet. And I can't tell them to be the best persons they can be if I'm not doing the same. Right.
Exactly.
So it's finding that purpose, whatever that may be. If you don't have kids and you are career driven, great, but maximize that. Again, evaluate your opportunities, get a mentor. If you're not all about work and you see work as a means to an end, but it's not everything for you, maybe you want to become a volunteer. Maybe you want to give back to your community. Maybe you want to coach a little league basketball group. Maybe you want to volunteer at the nursing home and give back to some of the, you got to find your purpose. And maybe you're religious based and you're faith based and you want to do more at your church and serve the people. When you find your purpose, I think you find a little bit more peace in life. Much easier said than done. But when you focus your efforts and you move in that direction, I think you start to see the challenges as just part of the process, right? It's not things that's necessarily going to take you off that path. It's just part of the process. Nobody ever said this is going to be easy, but this is what I'm committed to, right? So
I wholly agree with all of that. If you have any other Black men friends that would like to come on the show, please send them my way. So people that's struggling still, people that's in high power positions, maybe such as yourself, or people that's just trying to even figure it out in between. So,
right.
But I do appreciate you for coming on here, and hopefully we can talk again. Because I host a show with 3 other guys as well too. So hopefully maybe we can collaborate again and talk about another issue, the Black men's issue. So
just let me know, sir. And I may have a couple of folks I can recommend. I got people in the space that would be willing to talk. And I think this is needed. So commend you on what you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Even if it is a new podcast, I really admire efforts like this because your questions are timely. But right now, we're going to need these types of groups and supports more than people even understand.
I thank you for coming on.
Like dodging like strays, climbing out the gutter, I am real like the frame. Wrapped in shadow, but they shine like noon. For hearts beating, sink, break the